Horizon is one of my favourite new IPs to come out of the last generation, and I consider the first entry, Horizon Zero Dawn, one of the best games in the PS4's sizable library. It cannot be overstated how important Horizon was for its developer Guerrilla Games. It was a game that massively elevated the public perception of Guerrilla, proving that they were far more than just the Killzone team, which led to Guerrilla being considered one of the top dogs in Sony's stable of first-party studios. Needless to say, people had a lot of expectations for Forbidden West, and I do think there's going to be a contingent of players who will be disappointed by Forbidden West once they realise that it's more iterative than innovative. But is prioritising iteration over innovation a bad thing? No. While Forbidden West does feel quite similar to the first Horizon, it offers more than enough new ideas to stand on its own. This is an absolutely gorgeous looking game that further develops Aloy as a character and improves the already excellent combat mechanics of Horizon Zero Dawn. When you're already working with a foundation as great as Zero Dawn, being able to improve on that is impressive in and of itself. The story of Horizon Forbidden West picks up roughly 6 months after the end of Zero Dawn, and it does expect you to remember a lot from that game. While Forbidden West does open with a recap, it's a very brief and truncated recap, so if like me you haven't played the first Horizon in about 5 years, you may want to skim the Wikipedia page or search for a recap video, which was definitely helpful for me, because while I did still remember the broad strokes of Zero Dawn's story, I've played literally hundreds of games since it came out, and my memory of some of the specifics was a little foggy. Forbidden West follows Aloy as she investigates and tries to find the source of the Blight, a red moss that's spreading throughout the world and killing all the animals and plants it crosses paths with. Early on, there's some tension between Aloy and her allies from the first game, as we learn that Aloy basically bounced immediately after the final battle of Zero Dawn to continue her quest to save the world, leaving her allies feeling abandoned and left in the dark. Because of this, a major source of conflict in Forbidden West is Aloy always wanting to tackle problems by herself and carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. This is a theme that persists throughout Forbidden West, and it adds an interesting dynamic to Aloy's relationships with other characters. Though it can also be a little frustrating, because while you can see Aloy's perspective, you also know that she ultimately just needs to open up to her friends and gather as many allies as possible to succeed in her quest. I know this might not be a popular opinion, but for me, Forbidden West's story was a step down from Zero Dawn's. The overall story just didn't resonate with me in the same way that Zero Dawn's did. I still think the story is good, but my favourite aspect of Zero Dawn's story was unravelling the mystery of what happened in the old world to lead to the collapse of society, and by the end of Zero Dawn, I had the answers I was after, and without that mystery being dangled in front of me, I was less invested in what was happening. It also doesn't help that Forbidden West's story has a very slow start, and the first half of the game is all over the place in terms of pacing. While everything ramps up dramatically in the back half of Forbidden West, and it got me way more invested as it went on, that didn't fully make up for the plodding start for me. There's also a big emotional beat towards the end of Forbidden West that did not land for me. In fact, I thought it felt quite cheap and unearned, and it left a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth. The story of Forbidden West does still have plenty of bright spots along the way though. I really appreciate the way Forbidden West continues to flesh out the different tribes that make up the world of Horizon, and helps further differentiate them. I also respect the hell out of how weird the story gets. While I can critique the story in many ways, one thing I could never do is call it predictable. I don't think anyone could guess the direction that Forbidden West takes the story in, and I love that. I obviously don't want to spoil this game for you, so I'll just say that the villains of the game are awesome, and their plotline is very original and also over the top as hell. But the way Guerrilla commit to the ridiculousness of their story and fully lean into it meant that I couldn't help but love it. By the time Forbidden West ends, it does leave things in a fascinating place that left me very excited to see where the story goes next. Though this ending is so clearly meant to set up a third game in the series, which makes Horizon Forbidden West feel more like the middle chunk of a larger story than a standalone game. While the overall story stumbles in parts, one area where Forbidden West's writing excels is with the characters. And if there's one thing that Forbidden West's story deserves props for, it's the way that it really allows Aloy to come into her own as a character. Since Zero Dawn dropped, PlayStation have positioned Aloy as one of their big mascots, alongside the likes of Nathan Drake, Kratos, and Joel and Ellie. And while Aloy was a cool character with an admittedly awesome design, I always felt like she paled in comparison to those characters. Fortunately, after playing through Forbidden West, I no longer feel that way. I found Aloy way more charismatic in Forbidden West than I did in Zero Dawn. Not only is she a more fleshed out and developed character here, but she shows a lot more personality too. She's also not afraid to give some attitude, and even get a little snarky at times, which goes a long way for me. Of course, an inherent benefit to a sequel is also that you're able to see how the character's experience in the prior game has shaped them and helped them grow. Ashley Birch was great as Aloy in the first game, and her performance here is honestly the biggest factor in making Aloy as compelling as she is. Ashley brings the character to life in such a convincing way, and while I can't say exactly why without spoiling things, Forbidden West demands a lot from Ashley Birch, and she deserves all the credit in the world for rising to the occasion. While Aloy is the star of the game, the supporting cast are certainly no slouches either. The cast consists of a good blend of new and returning characters, and the performances are consistently good all around. Lance Reddick's Sylens is still one of the most interesting characters in the world of Horizon, which comes as no surprise. Lance Reddick is a great actor after all, though I did find Sylens to be a little underutilised in Forbidden West. While Sylens has a big presence in the beginning of the game, after that he just disappears for the vast majority of the story. I guess it shows just how compelling of a character Sylens is, that he's still one of the highlights of the story, despite only playing a relatively small part. Another pair of returning characters who consistently steal the scenes they appear in are Erend and Varl. These two were easily the most endearing characters in the first game, and they remain the most likeable characters in Forbidden West too. The way Erend and Varl both want to support Aloy and help her on her quest, even when she doesn't want to let them in, really makes you feel for them and see just what good-hearted people they are. Horizon Forbidden West expands the list of celebrity names in the cast with new characters played by Black Panther's Angela Bassett and Matrix star Carrie-Anne Moss, both of whom play fairly small roles. Despite having a relatively brief amount of screen time compared to other cast members, Carrie-Anne Moss's character Tilda is one of the most important and memorable characters in Forbidden West. Carrie-Anne Moss was a great pick for this character, and her performance is just top-notch. I know I'm being very vague here, but this is unfortunately all I can really say about Tilda without spoiling any major plot beats. Just like its predecessor, Horizon Forbidden West has dialogue trees that let you get some additional context for what's happening in the story. There are very few choices that actually affect the story in any meaningful way, so the vast majority of dialogue choices are just there to offer additional story exposition. And while these choices don't feel essential, they're a nice way to offer more lore to the people who want it, without dumping it on people who just want to play the game. The few significant story decisions are called flashpoints, and they're important for not only shaping the story, but also for fleshing out Aloy's personality and moulding her into your own unique version of the character, as they let you choose whether Aloy will take an insightful, compassionate, or confrontational approach to the situation at hand. Horizon Forbidden West takes a while to get going, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It takes its time reintroducing you to the world and characters from the prior game, and slowly eases you back into the mechanics of taking down the dangerous machines that populate the world of Horizon. But there is quite a lot to take in, so it's probably for the best that Forbidden West doesn't just throw everything at you all at once. It took a couple of hours before I reached a point that I was in an area where I could actually set off by myself and freely explore, and it was 8 hours before I reached the titular Forbidden West, a dilapidated version of America's West Coast that serves as the full open world map. Fortunately, it was worth the wait, because as soon as I was let off the leash in the open world to explore and tick off all the side activities, I was having an amazing time. Traversal feels far smoother and more refined in Forbidden West than it did in Zero Dawn, thanks to the addition of several new pieces of gear that help make Aloy feel more agile and let her navigate environments more efficiently. Aloy has a good few pieces of tech at her disposal in Forbidden West. There's the pull caster, a grappling hook that allows Aloy to pull herself out of the way of danger and zip to higher ground in an instant, though it can also be used to tear down barriers to gain access to new areas and move out of reach objects to help solve puzzles. Then there's the shield wing, which allows Aloy to easily glide down from great heights. Jumping off a cliff and gliding to your destination is always going to be one of the most fun ways to get around in a game. Where Aloy's gadgets really shine is when you start to use them in tandem with one another. One of my favourite things to do in Forbidden West is use the pull caster to grapple to the top of a building, then springboard off the grapple point into the air and glide away on the shield wing. While movement has been drastically improved, it's still not without its quirks and hiccups. There's still a degree of jankiness to climbing and platforming in Forbidden West. There's a stickiness to traversal that can make platforming feel imprecise and occasionally make it hard to get Aloy to jump where you want her to. There's also surfaces that really look like they should be climbable that aren't. These aren't problems that I was running into constantly, but they were niggling issues that I noticed a good few times during my playthrough, and in an otherwise very polished game, these kinds of issues stand out even more. Many of the trailers for Forbidden West had a big focus on the game's underwater exploration, which is made possible by Aloy's new diving mask. These underwater sections are filled with expansive stretches of open water and claustrophobic caverns filled with all sorts of resources. While underwater, you'll need to be wary of water-dwelling machines, as Aloy is much more vulnerable underwater than she is on land. There's no way to fight machines while underwater, so you'll need to hide amongst the kelp to sneak by them undetected. Underwater exploration is something that games have always notoriously struggled with, so this was an aspect of Forbidden West that I was very apprehensive about. Thankfully, Guerrilla managed to pull off Forbidden West's underwater sections in a way that few other developers have. Aloy has the perfect swimming speed, so you don't feel like you're too weighed down to move around freely, and while there's a decent amount of underwater exploration, there's not so much that you get sick of it. If you played Horizon Zero Dawn, you'll no doubt remember Aloy's focus, the little device she wears on the side of her head that she uses to scan the environment to locate important items, tag enemies' locations, and highlight climbable paths in the environment. This ingenious piece of design helps guide you through the environment in a diegetic way that is much sleeker than just having yellow or white paint splattered across everything in the environment to show you what can be climbed. The focus is also great for scouting out enemy-filled locations, as you can use it to highlight and tag enemies, and it even allows you to see enemies' patrol patterns so you can determine the best place to pick them off with a stealth takedown. Additionally, the focus can also reveal enemies' weak points as well as their elemental strengths and weaknesses, so you know how to best approach a situation. You can even tag specific parts on a machine, so if you need that part for a crafting recipe, you'll know to knock it off without destroying it. The excellent combat mechanics were easily the best aspect of Horizon Zero Dawn, and that remains the case in Forbidden West. Every aspect of the combat here is just wonderful. I'd even go as far as to say that Forbidden West has some of the best combat in all of gaming. I love how tactical you have to be to take down Horizon's gigantic machine monstrosities, slowly dismantling them by knocking different parts off and targeting their weak points. It feels almost like a westernized take on Monster Hunter. Of course, these machines won't just stand still while you destroy them, so hitting their weak points is often easier said than done. Fortunately, you can temporarily slow down time with a click of the right stick, which is crucial for taking down Horizon's fast-moving machines. While Aloy has a variety of weapons at her disposal, you'll likely be using bows most of the time, so it's a good thing that the bows still feel amazing to use in Forbidden West. There are different bow types that are specifically designed for different situations. Hunter bows serve as the standard bow that takes an average amount of time to draw back and deals a decent amount of damage, so they were what I used the majority of the time. But there are specific situations where using different bows is beneficial. If you're fighting a weak but fast moving enemy, warrior bows are perfect, because while they deal less damage, they shoot arrows much faster than a hunter bow. On the flip side, when dealing with a behemoth of an enemy who can absorb a ton of damage, you'll want to use a sharpshooter bow, because while it's much slower, its arrows also hit a lot harder. You'll also have access to a variety of different elemental arrows that can deal additional damage to certain machines. There's fire arrows to detonate flammable tanks on the machines, frost arrows to freeze them in place, and acid arrows that can corrode a machine's armour to make it more vulnerable to damage. Aloy still has access to plenty of other weapons outside of bows, many of which feel every bit as satisfying to use as bows do. There's the blast sling, a slingshot that flings bombs, the trip caster that lets you set explosive and electric tripwires, the rope caster which can bind enemies to the ground and rip flying enemies from the sky, the shredder gauntlet that flings razor sharp discs, and my personal favourite, the spike thrower, which launches powerful explosive javelins that can bring even the most sturdy machine to its knees. It's especially satisfying if you can hit a flying machine with the spike thrower and send it plummeting to the ground. You can even knock a machine's weapons off, pick them up, and use them against it. There are also large weapons strewn about the environment that Aloy can pick up and use temporarily. These are usually some kind of blaster that deal a lot of damage, but have a very limited amount of ammo, so you can't spam them too much. Though there are a few points in the story during set-piece moments where you're given a bunch of these giant weapons so you can go on a massive power trip. Horizon Forbidden West does a fantastic job of constantly giving you better and more interesting gear. There's an almost dizzying amount of weapons, which means combat doesn't get repetitive, and in fact just keeps getting better and better as the game goes on, which meant there was never a point where I was bored and just getting through fights to see what comes next, which is a problem I have with a lot of other action RPGs. The most improved area of combat in Forbidden West is the melee combat. The melee combat in Zero Dawn was very rudimentary, and while it still largely boils down to light, heavy and charged attacks here, there's a satisfying heft to the melee combat that lets you feel each hit land in a satisfying way. And Forbidden West also adds more melee combos and skills, which helps make fights flow better. As Aloy lands repeated hits on enemies, her staff charges up kinetic energy. Once her staff is fully charged, you can tag someone with this energy, which will appear as an orb of light on them. Shooting this orb will detonate it and deal a huge amount of damage. While melee combat has been massively improved in Forbidden West, there's still room for improvement. In the inevitable third Horizon game, I'd love to see Aloy given some more defensive abilities like a guard and parry, so you don't just have to roll out of the way of danger constantly. As you might remember from Zero Dawn, Aloy has the ability to override wild machines and have them fight alongside her or serve as her mount. I love charging into battle atop her long legs, which are horrific bird-like machines that slice their enemies to shreds with their bladed talons. These things can be a nightmare to fight as they often attack in groups. The pack will attack you from all angles and they're so fast that you don't have a second to think. By the time you've rolled out of the way of one of their attacks, you're often already being knocked flying by another one, so it's nice to have these creatures on your side for once. This time around, though, there are also enemies who can control machines. This raises the stakes of battles against humans, as you know there's always a risk of someone barreling in on the back of a machine. Forbidden West has an impressive and varied assortment of machines to duke it out with. In fact, there's over twice as many machine types in Forbidden West as there were in Zero Dawn. I just adore the designs of these mechanical monstrosities. I truly think this franchise has some of the best creature design I've ever seen. The machines are meticulously detailed with so many moving parts, and when you knock parts off of them, it just looks perfect. Some of Forbidden West's enemy types are highly aggressive and give you very little breathing room, which leads to some unexpectedly challenging fights. I found the venom-spitting Slitherfangs to be the biggest threat in Forbidden West. These gigantic snake-like machines are not only very fast and aggressive, but their movements can also be very tricky to predict, leading me to misjudge the time of a dodge and get cut down by one of their violent strikes countless times. If you're less drawn to the direct approach, there are plenty of encounters that you can tackle in a stealthier way, hiding amongst the shrubbery and quietly taking the enemies down one by one. I always like to sneak up on dangerous enemies to land a stealth takedown and take a decent chunk of their health bar away, giving me a leg up before the battle even begins. My one major disappointment with Forbidden West's combat is the complete lack of interesting DualSense implementation. Somehow the adaptive triggers aren't well utilised to simulate the sensation of pulling back the bow, and there's little to no use of haptic feedback. On paper, Horizon Forbidden West seems like a game that could be a perfect showpiece for the DualSense's unique features, so it's a shame to see such lackluster implementation of them. As you take down enemies and complete missions, you'll gather XP and level up. When you level up, your maximum health increases and you'll get skill points that can be invested in Forbidden West's 6 skill trees. Which trees you put your points into first will depend on your personal playstyle. The 6 skill trees are Hunter, which is focused on Aloy's combat abilities, Survivor, which improves Aloy's recovery and the effectiveness of healing items, Infiltrator, which is for refining Aloy's stealth prowess, Machine Master, which as the name implies increases Aloy's proficiency in overriding machines, Warrior, which unlocks new melee skills and combos, and finally Trapper, which increases Aloy's mastery of trap making. There are some very valuable skills hidden in these skill trees, like having some health restored whenever you land a stealth takedown, and the ability to load your bow with multiple arrows at once, which is essential when taking on heavily armoured enemies if you want to deal any real damage to them. I was a little disappointed that I hit level cap before I'd even finished the main story, which took away some of the incentive to finish the remaining tasks scattered around the map, because I didn't really have anything to gain from them anymore. Crafting played a large role in Horizon Zero Dawn, and it does once again in Forbidden West. You're constantly gathering crafting materials by searching chests, defeating enemies, and hunting animals. You'll even find crafting components just laying around the environment. Once you're at a workbench, you can use these materials to craft potions, arrows, and other ammunition, upgrade your weapons, and improve Aloy's storage pouches and quivers, allowing her to carry more medicinal items, traps, and ammunition. And while you can freely fast travel between the many campfires scattered across the map, if you want to fast travel from anywhere else, you'll need to craft a fast travel pack, so it's also helpful to stock up on these whenever you're at a workbench. Something Horizon Forbidden West struggles with is puzzles. All the puzzles in the game are very simple, with many consisting of finding energy cells to power up generators, scouring locations for notes that contain door codes, and shifting crates around to climb up to different parts of a room. These types of puzzles don't require any real thought, and they just feel like they're there to slow you down. This type of puzzle design feels extremely dated. Puzzles like these were found all over the PS2 and PS3 generations, but it really feels like we've moved on from them, and in a AAA game in 2022, they just feel silly and anachronistic. If the puzzles are going to be this mindless and sloppy, I'd much rather not have any puzzles. It's not like this game needs them anyway. Its characters, combat, and exploration do more than enough to carry Forbidden West. Occasionally you do get a more involved and clever puzzle. One that stands out saw me having to search an old railway station for a marker of when it first opened, because I needed the year it was established for a passcode, but these more thoughtful puzzles are very few and far between. A much appreciated inclusion in Forbidden West is the ability to tailor the UI to your preference. You can determine how much of the screen is covered with UI features and choose how much or little guidance you want. I prefer the more minimalistic approach, as I don't like having the screen cluttered with icons and indicators, but someone else might prefer a more guided experience, and it's awesome that that's possible for them, and it'll help make Forbidden West accessible and enjoyable for as many people as possible. Another area where Forbidden West stands head and shoulders over Zero Dawn is in its side missions. The side missions here are great. They regularly offer some of the game's best writing, and they're basically indistinguishable from the main missions in terms of production value. In this sense, you can see the way that The Witcher 3 is continuing to influence the gaming industry. I really feel like that game set a new gold standard for side quests that other studios have been striving for since. One of the main things that kept drawing me back to Forbidden West was its world. This post-apocalyptic take on the west coast of America is a fascinating location to explore, and I definitely found the map of Forbidden West a lot more interesting than the one found in Zero Dawn. Of course, with Forbidden West being an open world game, there are plenty of side activities to complete outside of the main story and side missions. And while some of these tasks do feel like standard open world fodder, I was impressed with the variety and level of quality found in the side offerings as a whole. There are some genuinely clever side activities, like the Vista Points for example, that task you with lining an image up with the ruins in the world to give Aloy a glimpse into what the world used to look like before it was ravaged by the machines. Once again, climbing to the top of the giraffe-like tall necks allows Aloy to scout out her location, which removes the fog from a portion of your map, as Aloy now has a lay of the land. Each tall neck is a unique platforming puzzle, as you have to figure out how you can climb to the top of it, and figuring this out for each tall neck was honestly one of the most fun parts of Forbidden West for me. And of course there's bandit camps to clear out. After all, would it really even be an open world game at this point without them? There's also a chess-like board game called Machine Strike that you can play in the villages that are scattered across the Forbidden West. It's a fun little distraction, and if you want to get really into it, there are a ton of different game pieces to collect by winning games and completing side missions. It seems like between Horizon Forbidden West, The Witcher 3, and Assassin's Creed Valhalla, tabletop games have become a staple of every great open world RPG. But the best side activity is once again the cauldrons. These are basically dungeons filled with platforming puzzles, and they're an absolute blast. They also always culminate in a massive fight, and for completing them, you're rewarded with the ability to override new machines. Forbidden West is absolutely stunning. It's undeniably one of the most impressive looking open world games ever made. In fact, Red Dead Redemption 2 might be the only game that can even give it a run for its money. Forbidden West's art direction is just astonishing. I love the juxtaposition of futuristic technology with a more primitive society. The environments are lush, the machines are richly detailed, and the human character models might be the best I've ever seen in a game. I found myself constantly going into photo mode just to appreciate every little detail of this game. Guerrilla have managed to give so much life to the eyes of the characters in Forbidden West, and if you zoom in on Aloy's face, the attention to detail is unbelievable. You can see every pore, hair, wrinkle, and blemish. The facial animation is equally mind-blowing. Guerrilla have captured so many of the little movements of people's faces, which makes the characters feel lifelike without ever crossing into Uncanny Valley territory. Early on in Forbidden West, I was getting quite a lot of texture pop in, but it eventually just stopped out of the blue, so I have to assume that this was fixed with a patch. And this was the only technical problem I ever encountered in Forbidden West, so you can definitely see the Sony first-party polish at play here. I have no idea how the wizards over at Guerrilla managed to get this game running on PS4. I played through Forbidden West on PS5, but by all accounts, the PS4 version is also incredibly impressive, and a perfectly good way to experience the game. The music remains as impeccable in Horizon Forbidden West as it was in Zero Dawn. I truly appreciate how distinct these games' soundtracks are. Within a couple of seconds, you can identify the music of these games because of its unique instrumentation and vocals, which perfectly suit the game's blend of primitive and futuristic. Despite taking place in this tragic, post-apocalyptic world, the soundtracks have this sense of optimism to them that I really like. So many games that take place in post-apocalyptic settings are accompanied by grim and dark-sounding music, which makes sense, but Horizon going against the grain just makes its music stand out even more. If you've ever seen one of my videos before, you've likely cottoned on to the fact that I'm more than a little obsessed with trophies, and I've just got to point out how weird the trophy list for Forbidden West is. You only need to complete about half of the side content in order to get the Platinum Trophy. Instead of having trophies for completing all of the side activities, trophies only ask you to complete a few of each type of activity. I know this doesn't matter to a lot of people, but for people like me that it does matter to, this takes away a lot of incentive to do all of the side content, because once I had the Platinum, there was no longer a carrot on the end of a stick to keep me going. It seems like the trophy lists for PlayStation's big first-party exclusives have been getting a lot easier over the past few years, which isn't necessarily a good or bad thing, it's just interesting to see. It's such a shame that Forbidden West seems to be getting so heavily overshadowed by Elden Ring. It really feels like that game just sucked all of the oxygen out of the room. And don't get me wrong, I get it. Elden Ring is incredible. I mean, I gave it a 10 out of 10, but Forbidden West is also fantastic and deserves far more attention than it's getting. In many ways, Horizon Forbidden West is kind of your classic sequel. It's far more iterative than innovative, but Zero Dawn was a great game, so naturally Forbidden West is too. While Forbidden West isn't a huge leap forward for the franchise by any means, it does continue to move the series in a good trajectory by further developing Aloy, refining the traversal, and taking the already stellar combat of Zero Dawn and finding ways to make it even better. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, or leave a comment. You can find countless other videos on my channel, including my recent reviews of Pokémon Legends Arceus and Elden Ring. And be sure to stay tuned for my upcoming reviews of Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga, and Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin.